The moment my wife saw the message on our bank account, I knew our marriage was about to face a conversation we had avoided for too long. Her expression changed instantly, not because she was angry, but because she finally understood that something between us had changed. My name is Daniel Carter, and for nearly 20 years, I believed Melissa and I had built a life based on trust, teamwork, and shared dreams. We started with simple goals, saved carefully, and worked hard to create a comfortable home in Colorado. I owned a small home renovation company, and Melissa worked as an office manager. We were not a perfect couple, but we had always believed we were partners. Every major decision, every important purchase, and every plan for the future was supposed to be something we discussed together. At least, that was what I thought. For months, I noticed small changes that were easy to ignore. Melissa became more interested in certain financial details, asked more questions about our savings, and sometimes seemed distracted when we talked about our future plans. At first, I assumed she was simply thinking ahead. After all, preparing for the future was something we both cared about. I did not want to create problems where none existed. I trusted my wife, and I wanted to believe that everything was fine. Then one morning, while reviewing our regular expenses, I noticed something that made me stop and look closer. There were changes in the way money was being moved between accounts, and some of the transfers did not match the plans we had previously discussed. It was not the amount of money that concerned me the most. It was the fact that I did not know about the decisions being made. That feeling was difficult to explain. It was not about losing control. It was about realizing that someone I loved was handling something important without including me. I spent days trying to understand what was happening before I said anything. I looked through our financial records, reviewed our shared plans, and tried to avoid making assumptions. I knew that jumping to conclusions could damage something that took years to build. But I also knew that ignoring the situation would not make it disappear. Eventually, I realized that this was not only a financial issue. It was a communication issue. Somewhere along the way, Melissa and I had stopped having the conversations that kept us connected. We were still living in the same house, sharing responsibilities, and caring about each other, but we had allowed important discussions to become uncomfortable topics we avoided. I did not want to fight. I did not want to blame her. I wanted to understand why this happened and what it meant for our future. But before I could have that conversation, I had to make a decision that would change everything between us. I had to protect our shared finances while we figured out what was really happening. And I knew that when Melissa discovered what I had done, she would finally realize that something much deeper than money was at stake. After I discovered the changes happening in our finances, I spent several days trying to understand the situation before making any decisions. The hardest part was not looking at the numbers on a screen. The hardest part was accepting that my wife and I were no longer having the same conversations we used to have. For years, Melissa and I had been the kind of couple who planned everything together. We talked about vacations, home improvements, retirement goals, and the future we wanted to create. We were not wealthy people, but we had always believed that careful planning and teamwork could give us a stable life. That belief was one of the reasons the situation felt so confusing. I kept asking myself how we reached a point where something this important was happening without both of us being involved. Instead of immediately confronting Melissa, I decided to look deeper into what had changed. I reviewed our financial history, looked at the patterns of our expenses, and tried to remember when the distance between us started growing. The more I looked, the more I realized the problem had been building slowly. It was not one single moment. It was a series of small changes that we both ignored. Melissa had always been someone who cared about security. She liked having plans, preparing for unexpected situations, and knowing that our future was protected. In many ways, that was something I admired about her. She was organized and thoughtful. But over time, I noticed that her need for certainty sometimes made her feel like she had to handle things on her own. At the same time, I had become focused on running my business and providing for our family. I spent long hours managing projects, meeting clients, and making sure everything stayed on track. I thought my actions showed love because I was working hard for our future. What I failed to notice was that being responsible financially did not automatically mean we were communicating emotionally. We were both trying to protect our life together, but we were doing it in different ways. That realization changed how I viewed the situation. I stopped seeing Melissa's actions as simply a financial decision. I started wondering what fear or concern was behind them. But understanding her possible reasons did not mean I could ignore what happened. A marriage required honesty from both people. Shared finances were not just about money. They represented trust, partnership, and the agreement that both people had a voice in important decisions. Before I spoke with Melissa, I knew I had to be careful. I did not want the conversation to become an argument where we focused only on who was right or wrong. I wanted to understand her perspective, but I also needed her to understand why I felt hurt. That was when I realized something important. The account was only the visible problem. The real issue was that we had stopped making decisions together. And before we could repair anything, we had to admit that we had both allowed that distance to grow. The night before I finally talked to Melissa, I sat alone at the kitchen table thinking about everything that had changed between us. The house was quiet, but my mind was full of questions. I kept going back to the same thought: how could two people who spent almost 20 years building a life together suddenly find themselves on different paths? I knew I needed answers, but I also knew that the way I approached the conversation would determine what happened next. If I walked in with accusations, Melissa would only feel attacked. If I avoided the conversation, the distance between us would continue growing. So I decided that the first thing I needed was honesty, not blame. The next evening, after we finished dinner, I asked Melissa if we could talk. I remember the look on her face because she immediately knew the conversation was serious. We sat in the living room where we had shared countless ordinary moments over the years. There were family photos on the shelves, memories from vacations, and reminders of the life we had created together. It made the situation feel even more difficult because this was not about two strangers disagreeing. This was about two people who had promised to support each other. I started by telling Melissa that I noticed changes in our financial activity and that I wanted to understand what was happening. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse her of anything. I simply explained that I felt disconnected from decisions that affected both of us. At first, Melissa became quiet. She looked surprised that I had noticed the changes. Then she admitted that she had been thinking about our future and had made certain choices because she felt responsible for protecting what we had built. Hearing that was complicated for me. Part of me felt relieved because I finally understood that her actions were not about ignoring me. Another part of me still felt hurt because she had made important decisions without discussing them with me. Melissa explained that she had been carrying worries she never shared. She was concerned about unexpected expenses, long-term security, and whether we were doing enough to prepare for the future. She believed she was being practical. She believed she was helping. But what she did not realize was that keeping those concerns private created a different problem. It made me feel like I was no longer her partner in those decisions. That conversation changed the way I saw the situation. Before that moment, I was focused on what happened. After listening to Melissa, I started thinking more about why it happened. We both realized that we had been trying to protect the same future but using different approaches. I wanted to create security through planning and teamwork. Melissa wanted to create security through preparation and control. Neither of us had bad intentions, but we had stopped communicating clearly enough to understand each other. Still, I knew understanding the reason behind her actions did not solve everything. Trust had been affected, and we needed to rebuild it carefully. I told Melissa that I appreciated her wanting to protect our future, but I needed to feel included in decisions that belonged to both of us. She listened, and for the first time in a long time, we were not just talking about money. We were talking about what our marriage needed. That conversation did not fix everything immediately, but it became the first step toward facing the real problem that had been hidden beneath the financial issues. After that conversation with Melissa, I realized that understanding the reason behind a decision did not automatically remove the consequences of that decision. I was grateful that we finally talked honestly, but I also knew we could not simply move forward as if nothing had happened. Trust is not rebuilt because two people have one meaningful conversation. It is rebuilt through consistent actions over time. That was something both Melissa and I had to accept. Over the next few days, I spent a lot of time thinking about what needed to change. I did not want our marriage to become a place where we kept score of who was right or who made the bigger mistake. I wanted us to find a better way of handling challenges before they became bigger problems. The first step was creating more transparency between us. Melissa and I agreed that important financial decisions needed to be discussed together before any action was taken. This was not about limiting each other or removing independence. It was about making sure we both felt respected as partners. For the first time in a while, we started reviewing our plans together. We looked at our savings, our monthly expenses, and the goals we wanted to achieve in the next several years. What surprised me was how different our perspectives had become. I had always viewed money as something we managed through planning and discipline. Melissa viewed money as something connected to security and preparation. Neither perspective was wrong. We simply had not taken the time to understand how the other person thought about it. As we continued talking, I learned more about the worries Melissa had been carrying. She explained that sometimes she felt pressure to make sure everything was prepared for the future. She worried about situations we could not predict and wanted to feel like we had a backup plan. Hearing that helped me see her actions with more compassion. At the same time, Melissa began to understand my side as well. She realized that when decisions were made without me, it affected more than our finances. It affected my feeling of being her partner. I did not need to control every choice. I needed to know that we were making choices together. That distinction became one of the most important lessons from the entire experience. A few weeks later, we created a new system for handling our finances. We scheduled regular conversations, reviewed our goals, and made sure both of us had a clear understanding of what was happening. It was a simple change, but it represented something much bigger. We were choosing communication instead of assumptions. We were choosing teamwork instead of separate paths. I also started making changes in my own behavior. I realized that working hard and providing stability was not enough. Being a good husband also meant being emotionally present. I needed to ask questions, listen carefully, and create space for Melissa to share her concerns before they turned into decisions made alone. Looking back, I understood that the financial situation was only the surface of a deeper issue. The real challenge was that we had slowly stopped involving each other in important parts of our lives. The experience forced us to recognize that a strong marriage requires more than love. It requires effort, honesty, and the willingness to have uncomfortable conversations. We were not perfect after that moment, and we still had different opinions sometimes. But the difference was that we no longer avoided those differences. We faced them together, and that became the foundation for rebuilding what we had almost forgotten how to protect. For the first time in months, Melissa and I started feeling like we were working toward the same future again. The conversations were not always easy, but they were honest, and that made a bigger difference than I expected. I began to realize that rebuilding trust was not about proving who was right. It was about creating a relationship where both people felt heard and valued. That was something we had lost without even noticing. We had spent so much time focusing on responsibilities that we forgot to focus on each other. As we continued improving the way we communicated, another important part of the situation became clear. The decision I made to protect our finances had changed the way Melissa looked at our marriage. She understood that I was not trying to punish her or take away her independence. I was trying to create a moment where we could stop and recognize that something important was missing between us. At the same time, I had to be honest with myself. I had spent years believing that providing financial stability was the main way I showed love. I worked hard, solved problems, and handled responsibilities because I wanted Melissa to feel secure. But I learned that security is not only about having enough money saved or having a plan for unexpected situations. Security also comes from knowing that your partner is listening, understanding, and standing beside you. Melissa and I began making small changes that slowly rebuilt our connection. We started having regular conversations about our plans instead of only discussing problems when they appeared. We talked about short-term goals, long-term dreams, and even small concerns that we might have ignored before. Those conversations helped us understand each other better because we were no longer waiting until emotions became overwhelming. One evening, while reviewing our future plans together, Melissa told me something that stayed with me. She said she never intended to make me feel excluded. She believed she was taking responsibility, but she did not realize that responsibility without communication could create distance. Hearing that helped me understand that people can have good intentions and still make choices that affect others in unexpected ways. I also apologized for the ways I had contributed to the problem. I admitted that I had become so focused on work and financial goals that I sometimes assumed everything at home was fine. I had not always created enough space for Melissa to share what was on her mind. That realization was important because rebuilding trust required both of us to look at our own actions. The biggest change was that we stopped seeing each other as opponents during difficult conversations. We started seeing ourselves as two people facing the same challenge. Instead of asking who caused the problem, we began asking what we could do differently moving forward. The financial situation that created so much uncertainty ended up teaching us something valuable about partnership. It showed us that a strong relationship is not built by avoiding difficult moments. It is built by facing those moments with patience, honesty, and respect. Melissa and I still had different personalities and different ways of thinking, but we finally understood that those differences did not have to divide us. They could help us grow if we learned how to communicate. The situation that once made me question our future became the reason we started building a stronger one together. After everything Melissa and I went through, I started seeing our marriage from a completely different perspective. Before this experience, I believed a strong relationship was built mainly on loyalty, hard work, and the ability to provide for each other. I still believe those things matter, but I learned that there is another part of marriage that is just as important. Two people can love each other deeply and still create distance if they stop sharing what they are thinking and feeling. That was the lesson Melissa and I had to learn. In the months that followed, we continued working on the habits we had created together. We kept our financial conversations open, but more importantly, we became more comfortable discussing things that had nothing to do with money. We talked about our worries, our goals, and the small frustrations that we used to ignore. Those conversations reminded me why I chose Melissa in the first place. She was not someone trying to create problems in our life. She was someone who, like me, was trying to protect the future we had built. We simply had different ways of handling uncertainty. Looking back, I realized how easy it is for couples to misunderstand each other. When someone makes a decision without explaining their reasons, it can feel like a lack of trust. But sometimes, behind that decision, there is a fear or concern that was never expressed. Understanding that changed the way I approached disagreements. Instead of immediately asking why something happened, I learned to ask what was happening beneath the surface. Melissa also learned something important. She understood that being independent did not mean handling everything alone. Marriage was not about one person carrying all the responsibility. It was about two people choosing to share the responsibility together. That shift in perspective helped both of us become better partners. We also created new routines that strengthened our relationship. We reviewed our plans together, discussed upcoming decisions, and made sure both of us had a voice in the direction of our future. These were simple actions, but they showed us that trust is built through consistency. It is built through small moments where people prove they are willing to show up for each other. The situation that once made me question our future became one of the biggest lessons of my life. I learned that protecting a family is not only about protecting financial resources. It is about protecting the connection between the people in that family. A bank account can be organized, plans can be adjusted, and mistakes can be corrected. But rebuilding trust requires patience and commitment from both people. Melissa and I were not the same couple we were before everything happened. In some ways, we became better because we were forced to have conversations we had avoided for too long. We learned that honesty does not always make situations easier in the beginning, but it creates a stronger foundation for the future. Today, when I think about that difficult period, I do not only remember the uncertainty. I remember the growth that came from it. I remember the moment we stopped trying to protect ourselves from each other and started protecting our relationship together. The biggest lesson was not about money. It was about understanding that the strongest partnerships are built when two people continue choosing each other, especially when life becomes complicated. As the months passed after Melissa and I rebuilt the way we communicated, I began noticing changes that went beyond our financial conversations. The biggest difference was not found in our bank statements or our planning meetings. It was found in the way we treated each other every day. We became more intentional about listening, asking questions, and making sure neither of us felt alone when dealing with difficult decisions. Before everything happened, I thought trust was something that existed automatically in a marriage. I believed that after 20 years together, it was simply a part of who we were. But I learned that trust is not something people build once and keep forever without effort. It needs attention, honesty, and care. Melissa and I started creating new habits that helped us stay connected. Every few weeks, we would sit down together and talk about our goals, our responsibilities, and anything that had been on our minds. These conversations were not always comfortable, but they became easier because we stopped seeing honesty as something that could hurt our relationship. We started seeing honesty as something that could protect it. One of the most meaningful changes was how we handled disagreements. In the past, when we had different opinions, we often focused on explaining our own side. We wanted the other person to understand why we felt the way we did. But we did not always take enough time to understand the feelings behind the other person's perspective. That changed after everything we experienced. I learned to listen without immediately preparing my response. Melissa learned to share her concerns before making decisions. Those small changes created a completely different atmosphere between us. I also noticed that Melissa became more open about the things that worried her. She no longer felt like she had to solve every problem quietly. She understood that sharing a concern did not make her weak or dependent. It made us stronger because we could face challenges together. I wanted her to know that she did not have to carry everything by herself. At the same time, I learned that being a supportive husband meant more than working hard and handling responsibilities. It meant creating a relationship where my wife felt comfortable being honest with me. That was something I had overlooked for years. I had always believed my actions spoke for themselves, but I realized that people cannot always understand our intentions without communication. Good intentions are important, but they are not enough. People need conversations, reassurance, and the feeling that they are truly included. The experience changed how we viewed our future. We stopped trying to create a perfect life and started focusing on creating a healthy one. We knew challenges would still happen. We knew there would be moments when we disagreed. But we also knew we had the tools to handle those moments differently. Looking back, I realized that the situation did not break our relationship. Instead, it showed us where our relationship needed more attention. It revealed the areas where we had stopped connecting and gave us the opportunity to rebuild those parts. Melissa and I were not just managing finances anymore. We were rebuilding a partnership. And that partnership became stronger because we finally understood that trust is not about never facing problems. Trust is about knowing that when problems appear, both people are willing to face them together. As time continued to pass, Melissa and I started realizing that the biggest lesson from everything we experienced was not about managing money. It was about understanding what it means to truly be partners. Before that difficult period, we thought we knew each other completely because we had spent so many years together. We knew each other's routines, preferences, and habits. We knew how to handle everyday responsibilities. But we learned that knowing someone's daily life is not the same as understanding their fears, hopes, and concerns. That was the part we had to rebuild. I began paying closer attention to the things Melissa shared with me, even the small details that I might have ignored before. I learned that sometimes a simple conversation could prevent a much bigger misunderstanding later. Melissa also became more aware of how important openness was in our relationship. She started sharing her thoughts before making decisions, not because she had to, but because she understood that including me was part of respecting our partnership. That change meant more to me than any financial adjustment we made. It showed me that we were both committed to creating something stronger. One of the things I appreciated most was that we stopped trying to prove our own points and started trying to understand each other. In the past, when we disagreed, we often approached the situation from opposite sides. I focused on facts, planning, and responsibility. Melissa focused on security, preparation, and protecting our future. Both of us believed we were doing what was best, but we were looking at the same situation through different perspectives. Once we understood that, our conversations became much more productive. We were no longer trying to convince each other that one person was right and the other was wrong. We were trying to find a solution that respected both of us. I also learned something important about myself. I realized that I sometimes used responsibility as a way to avoid emotional conversations. Working hard and solving practical problems came naturally to me, but sitting down and discussing feelings was more difficult. I thought taking care of things was enough to show that I cared. Melissa helped me understand that being present and listening were just as important. A strong marriage needed both action and communication. The experience changed the way we viewed challenges. We stopped seeing difficult moments as threats to our relationship and started seeing them as opportunities to improve it. That mindset helped us handle future disagreements with more patience and less fear. We knew that another challenge could come someday, because every relationship faces unexpected situations. But we also knew that we had grown stronger because we learned how to face those situations together. Looking back, I no longer saw that period as the moment when our trust was damaged. I saw it as the moment when we finally understood what our trust needed in order to grow. Melissa and I did not rebuild our relationship by pretending the problem never happened. We rebuilt it by acknowledging what happened, learning from it, and choosing to move forward with greater honesty. The financial issue that brought uncertainty into our home eventually became the lesson that helped us create a better foundation. It reminded us that a successful marriage is not built on never making mistakes. It is built on two people who are willing to learn, change, and continue choosing each other. When I look back at everything Melissa and I experienced, I realized that the most important changes did not happen on the day everything became complicated. They happened slowly afterward, through the choices we made every day. A single conversation did not rebuild our relationship. A single decision did not repair years of habits. What changed our marriage was the commitment we both made to become better partners moving forward. We learned that trust is not something people simply receive because they have been together for a long time. Trust is something people continue creating through honesty, respect, and consistency. Before that difficult chapter, I thought trust meant believing that the person beside me would always make the right choice. Now I understand that trust is deeper than that. It means believing that even when mistakes happen, both people are willing to face them together and find a better path. Melissa and I still have different opinions sometimes. We still approach certain situations from different perspectives. But now we handle those differences in a completely different way. Instead of keeping concerns to ourselves, we talk about them. Instead of making assumptions, we ask questions. Instead of waiting until something becomes a serious problem, we try to address it early. Those changes may seem simple, but they transformed the way we communicate. I also realized that the experience changed the way I viewed my role in the marriage. I used to believe being a good husband meant carrying responsibilities, solving problems, and making sure everything was stable. Those things are important, but I learned that being a good partner also means creating a space where both people feel comfortable sharing their thoughts. Melissa did not need me to have every answer. She needed me to listen. She needed to know that her concerns mattered. I needed the same thing from her. I needed to feel that my perspective was valued and that important decisions were something we would face together. The most surprising part of the entire experience was realizing that the problem we faced actually helped us become closer. It forced us to have conversations we had avoided. It showed us areas where we needed to improve. It reminded us that a strong relationship is not measured by how few challenges a couple faces. It is measured by how they respond when those challenges appear. Today, Melissa and I continue building our future together with a stronger understanding of what partnership means. We are more intentional with our decisions, more open with our communication, and more aware of each other's feelings. The difficult moment that once created uncertainty became a turning point that helped us grow. If there is one thing I learned from everything that happened, it is that protecting a relationship requires more than protecting the things you own. It requires protecting the connection between two people. Money can be managed. Plans can be adjusted. Mistakes can be corrected. But trust requires daily effort. Melissa and I did not create a perfect marriage after that experience. We created something more realistic. We created a marriage where two imperfect people choose honesty, choose understanding, and choose each other even when life becomes complicated. And that choice is what continues to make our future stronger.